Hello and welcome back once again to the Inquisitor podcast with me, Marcus Cauchi. Today, my guest is Leanne Dow-Weimer. She's a marketing strategist and podcast host. We're going to explore the world through the lens of millennials, Gen Z, looking at the situation, the context in which you're operating in, and how that affects how you show up, the challenges that you're facing and what that does in terms of tempting you to market in a way that is more self orientated, selfish, and why it doesn't work. We may get into some tactics and strategies, but we're really going to focus on intent and how you show up, your thinking. Are you thinking humanely and consequentially, or are you just thinking critically in terms of what advantage you can gain? I think there's a big disconnect, and it's a messy, messy environment at the best of times. It looks like we're going into some pretty tough trading period, and that may be quite extensive. So we're going to look at the back issues and the context in which you're having to operate in so that you start to make sense of why things are so tough and what you can do about it. So without any further ado, Leanne, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Would you mind giving the audience a couple of minutes on your history, please?
Yeah, of course. I am Californian. I think that carries enough weight worldwide to understand part of my mindset. But I grew up in San Francisco Bay Area, which colored my experiences to an international point of view, and where startups and nonconformity is really normal. I have an undergraduate degree in exercise physiology, where I understood what happens in the body on a cellular level to help us perform in sports or daily life motions. From there, I have my master's in business in entrepreneurial leadership with coursework in sports psychology, also known as performance enhancement. I work with small to medium businesses and various industries to help them find ways to grow in a customer centric, humanely, ethically way. And, I've seen a lot of success in those areas.
Lovely. Tell me this. What is it that really matters most in terms of your business? Why does it exist, and why have you chosen to go down this path, given all the choices that were available to you?
I leaned into my natural strengths and skill sets, but what really I saw a need and I saw success from companies that put people and relationships at the forefront. Having been an employee at a very large corporation where I had a boss tell me I was nothing but a number, I was like, man, if I feel this gross and icky, and this is such a huge turnoff to me, I know that other people are feeling this way too. And there's no reason for it. There's no reason in how we run businesses. There's no reason in how we treat customers. There's no reason in how we do our marketing that people should be devolved into something as abstract. And I saw success. I saw that other people felt that way too.
I'm delighted to hear it. It's certainly the core of the people that I'm trying to work with and help and support, because I think essential, especially in times of trouble. I'm delighted. I'm going to be interviewing Todd Capone soon because we've developed something called the Seller Code, which is basically a code of conduct that puts the customer first. It's humane. It's about behaving like a decent human being. And I think we should behave that way because it's the right thing to do, not because we're being scrutinized by somebody else. I mean, this is just basic, decent, common, decent human behavior. And in a time where uncertainty is rife, distrust is rife, volatility is everywhere you look. I mean, we've got war on our doorstep in Europe, and depending on where you are, it's in your house. And the Hamas issue, if there wasn't 70% unemployment, do you think 5,000 people would have been willing to do that? We're looking at systemic problems that are building and building and building. And I worry for my children. I've got children who are just in their teens or early 20s. And how on earth are they ever going to buy a house? How are they ever going to get out of being in debt or indentured? and having to work two jobs. I mean, for the time being, maybe the next 5, 10 years, we have the NHS. But what the horror stories we see and hear about American health insurance being tied to a job you hate just because you've got health insurance. What an insanity. That's not living. That's barely existing. That's the future any of us want. So what are you seeing? I want my generation who listen to become a bit more aware of how you see the world.
Well, you said quite a bit. So I think if we kind of distill this, is that America started off as an experiment. Along the way, we're human, we're not perfect. But what all humans are, what we all have in common is that we are hardwired to be social creatures, to have that interconnectedness. We're tribe animals, we're pack animals. We are not lone wolves. We are not like that's not how
Social primates.
we're primates. We're buddies. Like we're meant to find friends and help each other pick fleas off each other. That's
Yeah.
just how we're hardwired. It's gross. It's true. But part of that is finding the right friends, right? Because as a parent, maybe one of your concerns was, is my child hanging out with the right crowd? Have I set them up with the tools to make good choices, even when I'm not there? And it comes back to this role modeling and this what we've put out in the world in previous generations. So has your generation taught the up and coming ones how to be a good person when no one's looking? Maybe, maybe not. Depends. And so there's quite a bit in what you said that makes it hard to find that path forward and hard to find where we can either blow up the system completely, right? Because just failure is an option. It's not a good one. I certainly don't want to see it. But how, aside from failing, like how do we tweak it? Can we divert the stream? Is it too late? Is it already like a tidal wave?
I think you actually have a lot more power than you believe you have because you're now a bunch of new voters, first, second, third time voters. But your views of the world were formed over the last 10 years. That's not exactly been an easy time. And if you look at historical cycles and when people were born, people who are born in easy cycles tend to get a little bit complacent and entitled and then produce children who aren't quite ready for it. And then the shit hits the fan. And before you know it, we're where we are now. I'm definitely not saying our generation, Gen X is blame free by any stretch of the imagination. We've been absolutely complicit. We were the generation of Gordon Gekko, greed is good, Maggie Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, and all that stuff. And we started 15 years behind our boomer parents in terms of earning potential and everything else, comparative earning. But you guys have started 15, 20 years behind us. But by the time you're just about to be able to get on the housing ladder, most of us would have paid off our mortgages and we were already at a disadvantage. So navigating that must be a terrifying place. But I fundamentally believe that you have the power to make change. The idea, I look at our leadership, it's just as terrible as yours. When you're faced with two octogenarian presidential candidates as your best choice, you do have to wonder, really, is there a better way? And we're facing exactly the same thing, but it's happening everywhere in France, in Holland, in Hungary, in India, in Argentina. So I think there's a hidden world that we aren't aware of as analog natives. And I'm really curious to know what's going on channels that people my age and older are really not paying any attention to. There seems to be this entire world that you guys live in and that we know nothing about.
Yeah, I mean, as a millennial and a digital native, I definitely have always lived in a time where the internet existed as far as my memory goes. Now, there's a couple of things that like I'm scribbling notes as you're speaking so that I remember to touch on them. I think where we should start with this is what type of person wants to be president? What type of person is willing to do what it takes to be elected president? in the United States or in most of these countries. And how did they get propped up to and enabled to see that dream follow through? And I think where if we keep going upstream and upstream and upstream about who's in power, how did they get in power, what choices are they making, how do we fix this? I think going downstream to just vote for someone else is naive. And I think we need to go upstream to where's our feeder system? Where's the pipeline? Where's the citizen to president pipeline? And how do we diversify that? How do we get good actors into that? Because there's this myth that it starts at local levels, which it kind of does. But, very rarely have we seen that. We certainly didn't see that city, town, village mayor of America, USA, state in somewhere. We certainly didn't see that person rise all the way up if it was a small town. No, they were mayor for the rest of their life. When we look at the feeder system, it's the Ivy League colleges. It's the people who could fail and try again and have the funding because running for president or running for any office is quite inexpensive. They have friends that have money that can help support them. So it's how do we even that score?
Again, I mean, I don't want. Well, I do.
I took it down a different direction.
I really, really want to go down this path, but it's probably wise not to. It's a system, and in every system, you have inputs, stock, and outputs. If there's a blockage with the inputs, then you end up with a trickle, and so the bath doesn't fill out through the faucet or the tap. And if there's too much coming through, then you get an overflow. And it can either go through the overflow bit or it floods over the top. Okay. And that's where we have these boom and bust cycles. Because if then too much gets pulled out of the system in the outputs and the outflow, and it doesn't get put back in, then the system gets drained dry. And that's really where we're at to a large extent at the moment. Because if you and I get a few $1,000s, it's odds are it will go into being spent. Yeah. But someone with 100 million and a family office is just going to put it into assets, which means that they have to keep looking for more assets. And that creates asset inflation, which is why at the moment, the idea of most people, most millennials, or certainly Gen Zs, being able to buy a property unless they are massively assisted or there is a guarantor, I think is very low. Certainly in the UK, we're seeing houses of multiple ownership. Young people having to club together and 4 or 5 or 6 of them having to buy a house. That's insane.
As you say it, it reminds me of like the Viking longhouses where all of these families would live under one roof. And or even in the Native Americans, it was that it's almost like this return to shared communal housing. But that's not where I want to take this. Where as you were talking about this in responding to what I said, it came up the costs and the funnel and the voices. Like how do these voices get heard? Back to this previous world of where the digital natives are living is we live in a world where there's a democratization of your voice via these platforms. So anyone, anonymously, full face, anyone can get a piece of the pie where they can share information. They can become Instagram famous, Twitter famous, TikTok famous. It's been democratized that all you need is a small device. It doesn't have to be the newest, fanciest one. The entry has become much lower. And soon what we'll see the trend is that those people are going to be the ones that come into power. Now, I wish it was that simple. It's never that simple because they have to fight against the algorithms. And the algorithms are a new input output system in which they have to participate, layered on top of these other systems.
Again, you touched on something else because if you look at the third world war that appears to be forming at the moment between America and China, there's a third superpower, which is the tech companies. I mean, they are effectively a third superpower. They have soft power, they have influence through lobbying, And it's a really fascinating because I'm constantly trying to ask better questions. So, what do we need to do to create a fairer environment where the people who do the work actually get rewarded for it, but the people who accumulate wealth aren't penalized for it? It's not about leveling down, it's about raising up, but it's also about stopping abuse. The idea that someone who makes billions of dollars pays less tax than a single mum working two jobs is insane. It's inequitable. I think what we seem to have lost is compassion. We seem to have lost a sense of fairness because of the lie that we all serve shareholder value, and we should come skipping to work with excitement at the idea of making our shareholders richer. They're the last in line. They're speculators and gamblers, but because they have money, people are willing to sell their soul for it. Just look at what happens the moment a founder takes venture capital or private equity money. The job to be done is make the valuation target. It's no longer to serve customers in a unique and compelling way and create an environment where people want to come to work and serve customers magnificently. That's the sort of place we want to work. But we've created the condition that basically it's a hellhole and people have been dehumanized.
Absolutely. You know, earlier there was discussion between you and I about pinch points and where in history the pinch point exists. And I just had one of those aha moments. The pinch point exists when legislator decided that corporations have the set of rights that they have now. They didn't always. And so what happened was that corporations are now treated as entities that have their own unique rights to exist and to increase shareholder value, and that they are allowed to do that. So when the court case came about and the legislator came about giving corporations that like corporate bill of rights is really a turning point, I think, because before it was a company that had other, responsibilities. They were not allowed to just look out for themselves. They were not allowed to only the it's the premise. And this is the premise of what a corporation is where the pinch point of the problem exists.
It's interesting though. Last year, there was a massive shift in the likes of BlackRock, Y Combinator, Tiger, suddenly saying now instead of revenue at any cost and growth at any cost, you've got to collect cash, you've got to make profit. Now, that was all well and good saying that, but they've got 15 years of management, leadership, sales, and marketing who've learned how to scale at any cost, whether they had a product that was ready for it or not, or whether they were relevant, because they ended up creating this arms race where, certainly in tech, most of them ended up selling to each other. And I remember over a 3 year period, the number of companies in the Martech, sales and Martech space went from around 1,200 to 23,000. That is an insane level of growth because every one of those represented investors throwing money behind a financial instrument, not behind a company. They weren't trying to build businesses. They were trying to build something that they could flip for a profit in the Ponzi scheme that is Series A, B, C, D, and E.
It's money laundering.
It
it's
is. It's
I mean,
entirely
it
speculative.
might as well be a car wash. Like it really is. Like, oh well, I'm gonna go get my car wash today. Here's $20. Oh, okay, thanks.
What are the questions we should be asking of ourselves to create empowerment? To what are the questions that will enlist people who think like us into working together to try and come up with solutions to these wicked problems? Because a wicked problem is just a bunch of complex problems that we haven't quite worked out. And complex problems are just a bunch of less complex problems if you pick them to pieces. So we've got to find those pinch points.
So we have to find those pinch points, and I hate this cliche, but we almost have to boil the frog. And we have to take these small micro actions that will add up and chip away and chip away and chip away and create a new culture. And we have to be brave enough to structure our actions and our paths forward to work within the system, because Rome, ugh, so many cliches say Rome wasn't built in a day. But At the same time, neither were these. We just spent time talking about how it was this series of actions that led to this. We need to take a series of small actions in how we create our own businesses, who we sell our MarTech to, who we our investors are. You aren't required to have an investor, by the way.
Mhm.
You aren't required to IPO. You certainly aren't required to acquire your competitor. None of these things is a hard and fast rule. And when we let go of these assumptions that they are, we can we can say, what is the way that I would do this? What is the way that is the right way to do this? How can I structure my business so that it's a co-op? How can I promote within DEI people? How can I lift others up instead of put them down? And it's contagious. We are monkey see, monkey do. When we see more and more people do the right thing, we see it on TikTok. There's a famous TikToker. She is on my algorithm, maybe because I'm a kind person, but she has a fashion business where she talks about her struggles with poverty and how she set up her company so that everybody is an equal owner. Everybody, including her, the quote unquote owner, gets 70K a year. Everybody, and how it's a livable wage and how important that was to her to set up her business that way and how it's been successful for her. She could buy a home because she did a community house with friends. But now they're getting out of poverty because she lifted other people with her. She didn't go it alone. And she created a structure in her business that is profitable and equitable and ethical. And we can do that too.
And so often the pushback on that is, well, that doesn't work in the real world, but it does. There are plenty of organizations that prove it does. Zappos is another example. And there are dozens and dozens of examples of companies, but more importantly, there are thousands of examples of individuals who choose to take the high road, who choose to live by a set of standards. Now, my fear is that this is recession number 8, and I'm looking at 1929 as the closest comparison. People generally behave really terribly when they're afraid, when they're uncertain. And this is a period when uncertainty and fear will be rife. So, bad leadership, bad management, bad sales practices will be commonplace. To differentiate, all you will need to do is be a decent human being. I mean, literally, I've seen it 7 times before. I've been complicit. I didn't know any better. I do now. And what's really interesting is the evergreen skills, the evergreen characteristics that enable people to thrive in tough times, uncertain times, are their ability to cooperate, their ability to share insight, information, come up with an understanding together, come up with solutions together, choreograph who does what, when, to make sure that you play to your strengths and you make your weaknesses irrelevant, and then raise up everybody. That's how humanity got to the top of the food chain. And we seem to have developed an entire system that runs counter to that. And then you talk about loneliness. You talk about 60% of sales managers today are suffering from some form of stress related condition that is potentially health threatening. Now, that's insane. They have 7 to 8 direct reports on average. The CFOs should be quaking in their boots. Instead of trying to put them under more pressure and squeeze them to try and do more that doesn't work, why not take a moment and ask, is there a better way? How can we enlist these people to become the coaches, to contribute, instead of stifling them with playbooks and forcing them to do demos? It just seems insane.
It's while trickle down economy doesn't work,
It's absolute rubbish.
trickle down leadership does. When you are in a position of power, how you lead your organization absolutely impacts the culture, and how you enforce the culture is very pivotal to being the differentiator to having good culture that is positive and actually uplifting, and one that is just lip service. And that requires operation and work. And you're gonna, no matter what, it's a very fine line, and it's a very shades of gray area, because there's always going to be ruffled feathers. If you have someone come in that is a squeeze until dry person, that how that one individual interprets the culture might, they might say it's toxic. They're like, "Look, you can't let me do my job because you just want to do all these like meditations." Well, maybe do the meditation and let, touch some grass. But to that individual, their perception is that it's toxic. And so you can't please everyone, but I do say that there is a standard benchmarks of outcomes that are ethical and not ethical. Did we do this? You can measure it to some extent. Was this benefiting society? And things like, did we add jobs? Did our do they have health care with no payments for them? Do we have a support line? Do we have a whistleblower line? Do we check in? Do we have regular routine meetings? Are we intentional about this? And I think that being a community and being supportive, and that where as individuals, like, okay, let's say I'm operating in an organization. What can I do if I'm facing one of those stress related things? Is I can look external to my organization, to communities, and to networking groups, and I have the power to create something if I'm struggling. I don't have to struggle alone. I can say, you know what? I have this problem. Maybe someone else does, and I can start my own little thing.
We're definitely seeing a massive rise in high challenge, high support communities. There is a tendency for hero sellers to attract people who feel the need to be defended. You get people being drawn to this victimhood. I've been done out of my manhood. I don't have a voice anymore. Well, I disagree fundamentally. They absolutely have a choice, and they're playing the victim, and they're being pandered to because people will do almost anything for people who put a salve on their wound, justify their failures, and throw rocks at their enemies. And it's a lazy way to exploit people who are facing difficult decisions. My thesis is that my role in life is to help people make good decisions well when it counts. You know, I think over the next few years, we're all going to face some really difficult choices. And whether it's in business where we have to decide, do I sell to this person because it serves me? Or should I say to them, you shouldn't buy from me and let me recommend a better solution? That temptation will be there. I can't look myself in the mirror when I'm shaving if I'm going to do that to somebody because it's in my makeup that I believe that we are in service only to the customer's outcome. And the byproduct is we are successful, we get commission, we get paid, whatever. But the minute our emphasis is selfish in sales, we've forgotten that our reason for existence is the customer. And in politics, these are public servants. They're meant to serve the public, they're not meant to serve themselves. And so when you've got this system that is rigged in such a way that the behavior you are going to be asked to exercise, the decisions you're going to be asked to make in pursuit of a valuation target that will be out of date by supper time, and it may result in 10,000 people being a line item on a balance sheet and losing their jobs, their livelihoods of people. That level of irresponsible, venal, self serving leadership, I think you guys actually have an opportunity here by, as you said, creating co ops, creating ecosystems, thinking deeply and critically and consequentially about the decisions that you make, how you choose to show up and do business, the things that you won't do, the people you won't trade with. But you've got the entire globe as your resource base because you don't think in the same way. How many of your generation are trying to drag people back into the office?
God, I hope none. At the same time, I see both sides of the office coin.
Mm.
I see both sides of it. I love remote work. I really do. It has been so impactful to my personal success because I was remote working in 2017,
Yeah.
2018. I did it for a long time before COVID hit, and it was so necessary for myself to be economically positioned in a self sustaining way. But we are pack animals. We do bond better face to face. There are things that you do get to a more robust level of context information from working in together. That's not always positive, but there's also a skill that you can get from practice. I'm really good on Zoom knowing what my other party is. I can tell if I was on a sales call if I've lost you. I know that moment. I can tell in a job interview when I have fumbled it, where I said the wrong thing, because I'm really good at picking up on patterns and recognition and understanding body language and visual cues, like the face things. It's the same face. It's the same face that I'm reading, whether it's on Zoom or it's in person. The difference is that as a short female, I'm more at an advantage on a Zoom meeting because now the threat of physical violence is gone. Because as a woman operating in the world, whether or not it's assigned or consciously done by someone else, I know that men have testosterone. The friendliest man needs to build that relationship of safety first. And so when you're in an office, it's not as safe for women as it is for men. And that's why there's sexual harassment laws. That's why there's so many of these outcomes. But so Zoom is another democratizer. I see this as a positive benefit. I also see that building friendships and bonds with people in real life and in person is so impactful. So
Well, that
that's a whole tangent. I'm sorry.
no, no, no. It's really important, and it's a sad indictment that those words actually came out of your mouth. That you would feel threatened coming to work. It's just insane, even at an unconscious level.
I mean, I would say that most women have a story.
Mm,
Period. End of period. Most women
yeah.
have a story. Whether it's walking to and from their car to get to the office, I've been cornered in my cubicle and yelled at by a male manager and told all sorts of things when I was very physically incapable of escaping my cubicle, very physical incapable of taking on this person if it were to come to it, and they were in a position of power over my livelihood.
Mm.
And I'm not
So
alone
they
in
were a
having
bully.
that experience.
They
Of
were a
more
bully.
Yeah, it was a problem. But almost every woman has a story. Maybe not as extreme as that, maybe it's more microaggressions, but it exists.
Absolutely. And again, this is where I think there is a huge disconnect because what we've seen in the media is this sort of backlash, this anti woke. And it frustrates me because the idea of being aware and being respectful of other people appears to upset quite a lot of folk. And again, I'm a fan of Pascal's Carl Sagan's version of Pascal's wager, which is as an atheist, you hold yourself to the highest standard because it's the right thing to do, not because you have someone peering over your shoulder telling you it's the right thing to do, or because you'll get punished for it. And if it turns out that there is some almighty being afterwards, then the fact that you did right should stand you in good stead. And I think that's a much better way of looking at the world in terms of why we do things. I'm trying to enlist people to sign up to this thing, the sellercode.org. Go and visit it. It's simply a one page website that outlines how we believe we should behave at all times. And it starts with we're customer centric. Why? Because customers exist, and that's the reason we exist. No, nothing else. And it just simply puts stuff that I, as a buyer, would genuinely want a seller to do and behave in that way. Why? Because it would make me feel safe. And this is the key point. The point about trying to drag people back to work is not about getting them back to work, it's about control. And that is driven by a sense of fear and lack of agency because these managers are not equipped to be managers. Because let's face it, in the sales world, the top performer is the one that gets promoted into management, not the one who cares about developing people and is capable of doing it. I look at most of the tech companies that have grown up and they grow and scale and they become shitholes to work in. And the middle management is awful. And then they end up with this massive turnover problem. And it also then gets reflected in the churn problem because the salespeople are under so much pressure that at the end of the month or quarter, they drag deals forward, they put buyers under pressure, they drive them into the arms of the competition or into ghosting them and into no decision. Do you know that most sales organizations, because of this bondage to the playbook, create the conditions where they could double their sales, but instead they halve them?
Yep.
Because they don't understand human beings and they treat them like they're a number on a balance sheet, an organic ATM.
So true. I mean, and it's that psychological safety. In order Sales is most successful, I think you might agree, is in a series of actions that you just have to keep doing them. It's a marathon. You have to
You have to
day
have a
after
high
day.
boredom threshold.
Yeah, you have to be willing to hear no. You have to be willing to show up and keep trying and doing the reps and doing the follow-ups and doing all of the actions and do it enthusiastically. You have to have some grit and fortitude.
I'm going to
Now,
push back. I'm going to push back just because that grind mentality needs to be challenged as well. Sorry to interrupt, but I think you need to grind with savvy, um,
yes, yes.
and that's the key because you need to be intelligently lazy so that you
Yeah,
do all the work up front. So when you're in front of the customer, you're going to do next to nothing. My sales calls are interesting because we never touch on pain. Objections accelerate the relationship and build trust, and they generally volunteer the decision and the order on the first meeting. Then it's a matter of making sure that we're both right for each other with a 40% close rate on cold inbound,
yeah,
which is
yeah,
insane.
it's totally doable. I had like, for the longest time, I had like a 70 to 80% conversion rate
Mm.
for my very small population size there. All right. So I'm not saying that this is thousands of people, but the reason why is because the ones that I said no to, I said no to. I'm not it for you. And then I moved on. And I saved my time, I saved their time, and I could move on to a better fit that was less friction, that was meant to be. And I think that there's that hope, and you're right, you do have to be savvy. You do have to find the ones that, and I hate saying qualifiers because it's not qualifiers like like, oh well, are you a decision maker? It's not like necessarily like that. It's like, is this set of criteria that you're searching for match my set of criteria that I offer?
And this is the key. We need to stop thinking of the customer as something, someone we do stuff to.
It's
Uh,
not a level in Zelda.
I'm not sure what that reference is. I'm probably far too old. But I think the point here is that we need to align with the customer. We need to meet them where they are. We need to be in service to their outcome. And the moment we make it about us, our agenda, our quota, our desire to be on top of the leaderboard, to pay for the mortgage, it suddenly spoils the moment because what buyers really want is leadership and a safe pair of hands. They want someone to help them make the right decision well. What they don't want is someone peddling features and functions and ratcheting up their pain. They already know that they have pain. The moment we focus on their pain, what we end up doing is creating a subconscious association between us and that emotion of misery. It's unnecessary. If you focus on the better future that they want to create and what will be good about them, miraculously, they do most of the work for you because they tell you exactly what it is that you need to do for them to want to buy. And so the syntax is attract, engage, enlist, enroll, enlist. They need to volunteer at every step. The whole process of sales, the language we use, campaign, qualify, close, handle. I mean, who the hell wants to be handled by a salesperson?
It reminds me of oven mitts.
Yeah.
Like, I've got mitts on, I can't handle that. There was something that you said I just wanna kinda circle back to. As a person in sales, when your motivation is something external, it's that extrinsic reward of being on the leaderboard, you are setting yourself up for burnout and failure.
Yes.
Just as someone that needs to look out for their own human being mental health as a solo entity, you are setting yourself up for failure. You are setting yourself up for because every time that your success is defined by something outside of you, it's going to start to turn into like a drug. You need more and more and more and more. And that's part of, maybe how we got to this whole mess in the first place. But when you start to take that internal motivation of like self efficacy and confidence, and I am skilled at this, or I am building value, and you tell yourself a different message about who you are and how you're contributing and you're supporting that life's purpose that you've done outside of work, then you build yourself up for the long term. But when you just do it for the short term gains of I got on the leaderboard, I beat somebody, like that's
Well,
good luck with that in 5
let,
years.
let me put this into stark contrast. The win that you make this quarter is you selling your reputation, your word, your trustworthiness. If you omitted anything, if you coerced them, if you put them under pressure, if you scalped them, if whatever you did in order to try and serve yourself first, you've now created the conditions where the buyer, at an unconscious level, their brain is now seeing you as a threat. One of the stupidest things that we were ever taught was under promise and over deliver. I've just lied to you twice. And what I do at a neurological level is I create uncertainty in your brain by over delivering because now I've got a surprise. The best thing you can do is deliver exactly what was expected, not more, not less, just what was expected, because then the brain is calm. And our number one job as sellers is to keep the amygdala calm. And it starts by keeping ours calm. Because self awareness, by the way, is not just knowing how you feel, but it's also knowing how other people are receiving and then projecting and reflecting back how they receive you. So, some critical fundamental skills that we are not really taught very well: self awareness, consequential critical thinking, deep listening, real empathy, genuine quality questioning that actually helps the buyer to advance because it's timely, it's relevant, it's valuable. It helps them understand and get clarity on their reality. It helps them to understand what options are available to them and possible within their grasp and move them towards making a good decision well. That's our job. If you had to summarize sales in one line, help others make good decisions well. Now, if we do these things and we apply empathy and acumen, then suddenly we think as the customer. Empathy is not just understanding, empathy is feeling what you feel, seeing what you see. And the problem is that we're taught to weaponize all of this stuff. Active listening, that's weaponized. The tactics are weaponized. And then you weaponize AI and you scale the noise to deafening points where no one can hear you. It does seem insane.
It's communication. And there's so much about communication that I thought everyone knew. They do not know. They do not know. And to reinforce what you said about psychological safety and the over deliver, you can still over deliver transparently and create delight without fooling or lying to someone. So let's say I'm closing. I'm at the stage where, the next steps is about to happen. I open my call, I tell them, this is what we're gonna go over at the call. At the end of the call, when I'm talking about next steps, I say, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna do X, Y, and Z. And here's what I'm hoping to do for you is, and I don't want you to expect it because, I'm not sure I can swing it and mean that genuinely, but like set that expectation that I'm still trying to do even more for you.
Well, customers
And that's
want to know
great.
you have
That's
their
great.
back.
You can do these things that you're taught to do. It's the how, not the what, that's the differentiator. That's where the value is. It's the how you do it.
And it's the intent behind it as well that
Yes.
matters too. Leanne, look, we've come to time. This has been a really fascinating conversation. Thank you so much. What is it that at the moment is currently impossible for you that if it was possible would change the game entirely?
That is such a profound question. What would change the game for me in what context? Which like Leanne's personal life?
You pick, but if you're willing to be vulnerable enough to share it on the recording, then probably something to do with work, business, but it needs to satisfy that purpose, the thing that matters most to you. What's preventing you from being able to accomplish it, or getting in the way, or is there a barrier that you can't break? Is there a account you want to break into? Is there a shift that you want to make? I'm just curious.
This is going to tell you a lot about who I am. And when we talk about internal and external locus of control, I found out very early on that I am responsible for what happens to me and what I do next. And so, with that ethos, it's very difficult for me to ask for help or to say, someone else could help me with this roadblock because I take aggressive ownership of it. I say, Leanne needs to do X, Y, and Z. Leanne, I assign that task to me. So, for me to shift my mental model to ask and say, what is the external barrier? Is a very difficult mental
Are
exercise.
you open to a challenge?
I would love to be challenged. I think the challenge for me is not self-eliminating.
Absolutely. I think it's more than that, or simpler than that. I question why it is that you take responsibility for what happens to you as opposed to simply how you respond to what happens to you. Because if the meteor strikes, you don't have any responsibility or control or agency over that. And most of the time, we believe we have agency over stuff, but actually, I reckon it's no more than 30%. So if we narrow it down to the 30% you do have agency over.
I mean, and so that's the duality of it is that like, yeah, like, I don't have control over a meteor striking or an earthquake or a tsunami or a natural disaster. It's still it
I'm gonna interrupt and challenge you once again because I want to just bring you back because
yeah,
something
bring me
the
back.
things that you have said. I think there's an epiphany waiting for you here. I hate to part before we've done it. So you talk about wanting to be collegiate, cooperative, build more, but because you feel that you have to do it all, you're preventing yourself from being able to take and invite help. So I'm curious, what would happen if you were to let yourself and give yourself permission to take help from people, knowing that at some point, because we play the game of long term selfish and reciprocation, that you would feel compelled to give back because you are a social primate.
The more that we're talking about like what would be life changing for me would just be if something I said really resonated for you and you think we would be good friends, let's be friends. I think that ultimately, being that social animal and looking for that community and collaboration, the number one thing that I spend my time doing is looking for people that have similar mindsets and values to me and trying to be their friend. I want to be friends. That is what will make my life like game changer, hands down, is finding more people that are the right puzzle piece to be my friend.
Lovely. Now, this is the killer question. What will be good about that? If you find friends, what's good about that?
It's intrinsically positive for exactly what it is, no more, no less.
We'll end on that. Leanne, thank you.
Thank you.
How can people get hold of you?
Being the social animal that I am, you can find me on LinkedIn, where I spend my time networking, getting to know people, finding partnerships and collaborations. My name is spelled Leanne. Last name is Dow-Weim as in Mary, ER.
Excellent. Leanne Dow-Weimer, thank you.
Thank you.
So this is Marcus Kauke signing off once again from the Inquisitor podcast. If you've enjoyed this, then please like, comment, share, subscribe. If you've disagreed with us, then please like, comment, subscribe. Give it a 1 or a 5-star review on whichever platform you use and tag someone. Now, at the moment, I'm taking on a handful of people who are really looking to think critically about their role and the life they want to create for themselves, and to do so in a way that fits with their values without having to fall foul of the corporate machine or compromise their values. So I'm enlisting people. If you are interested in really developing yourself as a human being and being successful and having a full, well rounded life, then please go and visit thesellercode.org. If that resonates with you, then we may have a conversation around working together. But I challenge you, just add it to your email signature and say, I am proud to sell using the seller code. Then people will be able to hold you to account to those standards. I'm trying to create a movement in sales where people are absolutely committed to the customer. And simple as that. So take care, have fun, happy selling. Bye bye.